All right, everyone. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock. I'm going to get us started with just a few housekeeping measures. I apologize to those of you who this is your fifth time hearing them, but just in case it's your first, welcome to Lumsden McCormick's annual Exempt Organizations Conference. My name is Christine Prug-Jib, and I will serve as your host for today's webinar. Before we get to introductions, I'm going to run through several housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded, and once available, we will post to the Lumsden McCormick website. I would keep an eye on the site for early next week, but there will also be an email that is sent out. Additionally, a link to slide decks that we are permitted to share will also be available. Both the chat and Q&A feature are enabled. Please make sure to add your questions for Mike in the Q&A box. We will be answering questions at the end of the presentation as time permits. We are offering 1 hour of CPE credit for each webinar. Therefore, all polling questions must be answered. We will have 5 polling questions for this presentation. CPE certificates will be emailed from support@prolera.com within 30 days. The subject line will read Lumsden McCormick CPE certificate. At the end of the webinar survey will automatically launch in your browser. The survey will serve as the webinar evaluation and is required for your CPE credit. Additionally, the Prolera email with your CPE certificate that you will receive will also contain a webinar evaluation. This evaluation is optional to complete. However, we appreciate any feedback you may have. Any questions related to housekeeping items, please send me a message in the chat. Now moving on to our presentation. I am happy to introduce today Michael Fano. He is the CEO of PCA Technology Group. He leads the overall management and direction of the company. He is passionate about guiding companies to success by developing a vision and helping to translate that vision into reality. He also loves playing guitar and donating time to assist in the classroom at the University of Buffalo School of Management. Okay, Mike, turning it over to you.
Thanks for the intro, Christine. I'm happy to be here with everyone virtually today. We're going to talk about a really fun topic, a scary topic, but kind of interesting. I think you'll find it interesting. Something that certainly has a lot of benefit to us all. We're going to talk about cybersecurity threats. I think it's pretty safe to say that this is something that we are all going to be dealing with through our lifetimes. And I'll talk more about that. You'll see more about that as we move on. A little bit about my company. We've been in business for 34 years. We are based in Buffalo, right by the airport. And, our goal is to guide companies to succeed with technology. I'm going to review the agenda briefly. We're going to start out by going through some fun stats. You're going to see some staggering things in there I think will interest you. The focus of today's presentation is going to be on social engineering. Social engineering is the predominant method that the criminals out in the world are utilizing to try to gain access to your networks, your computers, your data. So we're going to focus on that. A lot of really interesting concepts there. And then, we're going to share some horror stories, give you some of the bad stuff, give you we're also going to give you recommendations. These are things you should be doing now, and also some things you might want to consider. So I attended a webinar recently, and, the individual presenting made a great point. And he said, there isn't enough money in the world to give you 100% confidence in your IT infrastructure to protect it, or that companies would go bankrupt if they had to spend the necessary resources. So what we're going to be talking about is what you can do, what layers you can put in place to protect yourself. All right, we're going to jump into some statistics. This is a staggering one. Cybercrime will cost the world by the end of 2023 $8 trillion. That's a cumulative number. But think about the magnitude of that. It's pretty good business, right? It's not going away. It's too good of a business. It's a multi-billion-dollar annual industry, and the people that are involved in doing the crime, they operate it like a business. So huge dollars. Here's another staggering one. The information I'm giving you is based on what's been collected. There's a lot of information, a lot of data that's not collected. Only 10% of cyber crimes are reported typically. And why would people not report it? Certainly the reputational risk of people knowing or other companies knowing, that's a big reason. It's the perception that there's a problem at a company, and companies are reluctant to share that. Certainly the compliance regulations change that. There are required disclosures depending on whether you're subject to HIPAA, New York Department of Financial Services, et cetera. So, but a very interesting stat. Half of all cyber attacks are targeted at small organizations. So something to keep in mind. If you think that you're not a target because you're a smaller organization, that's not the case. One of the reasons why the smaller organizations are such good targets is that on average, they probably don't invest in cybersecurity as much as larger companies. So while they might not be as lucrative of a target, they might be easier to be able to get money out of. So that's the gist of that one. 92% of cyber attacks start with a phishing email. That's why we're talking about social engineering today. Phishing is the predominant attack vector in the world today, and it's a very successful attack vector. And, people get duped by phishing emails all the time. You see the reasons: curiosity, fear, urgency, reward recognition, social. The other thing is the criminals are getting really good at creating very, very authentic looking emails, and it's becoming harder to detect what isn't real. So we're going to talk about the things to do and what not to do to avoid falling victim to phishing attacks. Cybersecurity stat number 5. So this is an interesting one, and this is one that's going to a little bit of a threat as we get into the presentation. So 34% of all attacks were launched as business email compromises. So what that means is that 34% of these attacks were trying to gather credentials, your business email credentials. And here's the real staggering statistic. 80% of organizations that fell victim to the attacks, they didn't have multi-factor authentication in place. So 80% of the ones that got hit, they did not have it in place, and that creates an additional vulnerability. We'll talk about multi-factor authentication. And if you use Microsoft 365, which most do, it's free. All right, we're going to move on to number 6. Here's another area that I just want you to be aware of. The Internet of Things. It sounds great, and this is more of a personal one. I bet a lot of people out there have security systems, and they've got these new doorbells and cameras and thermostats in your refrigerators, a smart fridge and all that. Did you know that they are one of the hottest attack vectors out there? And the reason for that is there's usually not much security around them. A lot of times people don't change the passwords, the default passwords that come with these type of devices. But, on the business front, a lot of the bad guys are leveraging things like this, like security systems or temperature control systems. And they're trying to use that as a jump off point, because all companies, if you have a third party vendor or you need access to this stuff when you're not in the office, there's a hole in your firewall. So you can get information back and forth. So if somebody should hack into a device, there's a possibility that they could jump from there to another part of your network. So these are things to think about. Cybersecurity stat number 7. 50,000 websites are hacked daily. And speaking about WordPress is the predominant website framework. So 90% 97% of the WordPress site hacks, they were actually a result of a plugin exploit. So if you're familiar with WordPress, you know that it's an open platform. There's a gigantic community around WordPress to build all these plugins and all of these add-on products. It's fantastic. But you need to understand that as you bring in these plugins, there is risk. There can be vulnerabilities. You need to make sure that you're keeping the framework up to date, updated with any patches and whatnot that might be out there. Very, very important. We're going to move on to polling question number 1, and I will read it. Have you ever attended a cybersecurity user awareness seminar, webinar, not including this, of course? Yes or no?
Okay, we'll just give this a little longer, see all those answers coming in.
Do I need to click on it?
Nope.
Okay.
You can sit there and enjoy the beach. Okay, and we will share those results here.
That's pretty good. 80% have attended. That's good. That's good to hear. For the 20%, well, hopefully this will change your opinion, and you'll want to incorporate this more into your regular routine. We're going to move on, and we're going to focus on social engineering. And what we mean by this is it's the clever manipulation of the natural human tendency. So the bad guys have become really good at reading people and what people will react to, and they are experts at it. We're going to start with phishing. I'm sure you've seen this type of email before. It's a very common email. And typically it's portraying itself as a trustworthy entity who is reaching out, and a lot of times it's the password expiration. That's a great one. And it looks pretty authentic. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to give up sensitive information. We've all experienced it. I know every day when I come in, I try to train my computer, but I still have a lot of phishing emails. Most of them are marketing and they're not nefarious, but we still get a lot of nefarious ones that will sneak through. It's hard to stop all of the spam without stopping stuff that you really want to receive. And here's a good example of an email that you're likely to get. And the main thing I want to bring up about this subject is that the trustworthy institutions that may email you, they are not going to put a link in the email. Okay, Microsoft is never going to put a link in an email and say click on this link. Your bank will never put a link for you to click on and reset your password. Those are things in general to just understand that if you see a link, beware. Even if they do it and it's legitimate, don't click on the link. Just log into the regular portal that you're familiar with and that is the real thing. Because you might get directed to a website that's not real. And I will show you a couple of examples. Here's a really good example here of this is a Facebook instance where they're taking you to it's either a password reset or a login screen. And you can see that the one that's the phishing one, it looks pretty real. It looks very real. And by the naked eye, it would be hard to tell. Even the URL at the top is very close. So it's not easy to tell that it's that it is a fake website. But the one on the left is fake. How does this stuff work? So I want you to understand how this works. So when the attacker sends you an email, they're trying to get you to click on something, right? And that might be in the instance of a Microsoft 365 email that went out. they're trying to send you to the website to harvest your credentials. So you click on the link, opens up the website. You think you're putting your password and your user and password in so that you can reset your password. The hacker on the other end has just harvested your data. So now they have your username and your password, and they can use it to log into the real site. So scary, right? Happens all the time. Happens all the time. And we deal with it all the time and try to give our clients the right advice to avoid falling victim to that. We'll get into spear phishing. This is another very similar to regular phishing. The biggest difference with spear phishing and regular phishing is it looks like it's coming from somebody that works with you. And this is a very common one. I need to change my direct deposit information. Can you make a change for me? An email gets sent. The one thing that I want you to beware of is, if you look up in that from, typically, if you look at the actual email address, it's obvious that it's not the real person. However, it's not guaranteed because there are software solutions out there for the bad guys to actually make that email address look like the real thing. But typically it's not. So the first line of awareness is to see where it came from. And then we'll talk about a better solution on how you should never fall victim if you have something enabled in your Microsoft Exchange settings. And it's the external email notifications. So I want to bring this up at this point in time. This is just a setting. And the difference between what you saw on the previous one and what I'm showing you here is this is an email that came to me, and it's not from somebody who works at PCA. It's from outside my organization. And when I receive this email, you'll see that I have a caution banner at the top of my email telling me that this email originated from outside of my organization. Now, when we were looking at that previous example, if somebody was pretending to be somebody on the inside of your organization and they sent that email and said, hey, change my direct deposit information, guess what? This banner would show up. And you'd say, wait a minute, it's supposed to be from so-and-so who I work with. Why does it have the external banner on it? So that's how you prevent yourself from falling victim to internal phishing. Now, if they actually get access to the person's email account, all bets are off, because if they could send an email through that person's account, which we'll also talk about that. Whaling. And this is a type of phishing attack where a lot of times it's an email that comes from a very important person in the organization, maybe one of your executives, one of your leaders, and it's asking you to do something for them. Has anyone got one of these? You don't even have to raise your hand. I know you have. You see this one. Hey, it's Roger. It's the CFO. Are you busy? I need you to process a wire transfer, right? This happens all the time. In fact, every new employee at PCA, within their first month, they will get a phishing email from someone pretending to be me. And it will say, hey, I'm really busy and I need you to go buy some gift cards for me. Can you do that? Every single person that starts here will get that phishing email. And how do they know? You know what? We all use things like LinkedIn. The bad guys have a lot of tools. They go out and they scrape social media platforms and they figure out, hey, who's the CEO? Who's this? Who's that? They have a lot of tools. So it's not hard for them to figure out who is in a leadership position in a company. Something to be aware of. And here's another one that is become popular. We'll talk about this a little more. There's a couple of really big breaches that happened recently in Las Vegas. Both of them were as a result of phishing, and it's basically using the phone and calling in on a phone and basically portraying themselves as somebody that they're not to try to get access to information. And it's a really good way of doing it because people are trusting and they get a phone call and they think, oh, who would call me? Who would call me asking me for my information like that? They have to be my support people. Not necessarily. And then this one's become more popular, smishing. This is where they're using text to reach out. It's happening a lot. In fact, myself and another one of our leaders, we have been popping up on our people's phones, under the guise of a text being sent. And hey, can you do this for me? Very similar to what happens with phishing. It's happening via text. The other thing I want you to be aware of is, just in general, be very careful about the text that you receive. I got a text from Verizon Wireless. It was very legitimate looking, and it was actually embedded in the thread of legitimate text messages I got from Verizon. And it was a link to go, hey, you could get an iPad or something if you just fill out this survey. I quickly did some research on that and found that it's well known and it's fake. So be very careful about what you click on in text messages as well. Make sure it's somebody you know. Web surfing, just in general, there's a lot of exposure. Make sure that you're, for business purposes, you need to have a policy in place that really specifies what people can do. Our recommendation is that you should keep people off of, personal surfing on their business machines. There's so much malware that's on websites that you can easily get infected with, that if it's not a website you're familiar with, you just don't want people surfing on your work machines. The other thing is pop-ups are dangerous. Be very suspicious of any pop-ups you receive. The other thing that I will tell you to be careful of is add-ins. Browser add-ins are a major attack vector, and as a policy, we would recommend disabling add-ins unless they are absolutely needed. It's time for polling question number 2. Do you have an incident response plan or a disaster recovery plan? And we'll give you a little time to answer.
Okay, I see those answers coming in. Mike, I think you'll be pleased with this.
Oh
this
boy.
response. Okay, here we'll share it now.
Look at that. We have a lot of rock stars out there. This is great. That's really good to hear. I'm not going to ask the next question. The next question would be, does anybody really review it? That's the other part. So it's great. And I'm glad to hear so many of you have it. The part that most organizations that have plans in place fall down on is you should review them annually. You should share that information with your staff. It's good to let people know, hey, here's what we would do if something happened, and just making sure that everyone's on the same page with respect to what would happen in your organization should there be a security incident, or also what to do if you notice something weird or something odd. Having your people trained is a huge part of protecting the organization and reducing the overall risk of the organization. All right, we are moving on. I'm going to give you some of the horror stories. Wow. This was a crazy one. Google and Facebook, they both fell victim to imposter emails to the tune of over 100 million. So they were business email compromises. It was actually an account of somebody that had regular business dealings with Google and Facebook. That person's business email account got compromised. a nefarious individual started to communicate with Google and Facebook and send them invoices. And in a big organization like that, these kind of things can slip through the cracks easier. They're so gigantic. And they just kept paying these invoices, paying. $100 million is gone. And there is no way to get it back. The next one on there is not-for-profit funding sources. I think there's several not-for-profit organizations, or mostly not-for-profit organizations on this call. A prospect that we met with about a year ago had a situation where a business, one of their employees had their business email compromised, and the individual who compromised the email first thing they do is they start reading all your email, and they develop a profile on you, and they start looking for things like things related to finances. And the bottom line is they quickly figured out who the funding sources were for this not-for-profit organization and sent emails to them to change the source, the funding the source of the bank that it was going to be transferred to. And the funding source actually made that change without talking to anybody at this prospect. The bottom line was it was about $400,000 or $500,000 that ended up getting wired to an account somewhere in the world, across the world, and the money was gone. So when we talk about business email compromise and the risk, this is one of the most critical things to protect yourself against. The next one on, and this is another staggering one. It started, I believe it was in the Ukraine, NotPetya. It started as a phishing exploit, and it was very, very successful as a phishing exploit. And then they actually figured out a way to deliver a nefarious payload via an accounting software. So they had somehow embedded themselves within this software and had a way of triggering something when a company was logging into the software. Then you can see the losses. The estimated losses on this particular one are about $10 billion. So staggering dollars, big dollars. The next one, this is one that's been going on for years and years. Direct deposit change requests. It happens all the time. And it's been happening for over a decade. The bottom line is, the recommendation is do not change things like this via email only. It is just bad practice. And I have seen multiple instances of bad stuff happening when an individual just didn't go that next step, having a conversation, picking up the phone and I want to make sure that this is right. Are you asking to have it changed? I know here at PCA, we have a strict policy, which is, and we're small, we're about 50 employees, but if somebody wants a change to their direct deposit and they request it from us, we have to talk. We have to talk to the person. We're not going to just make a change based on an email. And this one here is a recent one. You probably saw this in the news, MGM and Caesars. And this was a phishing attack. So the individual called in under the guise that they were a support, an IT support person for these organizations, and they got some personal information out of them. They got credentials from the person. That was a very sophisticated attack, and within a short time, they were in. And this is just an estimate, but it could be much higher than $100 million. But staggering dollars here, and they did it by just making a phone call. Just a phone call. So another opportunity to train your people on what to look out for. We're going to talk about best practices now. So now we're going to kind of shift gears. We talked about the techniques that are out there. We talked about some of the horror stories. Well, what can you do about it? What are the best practices? That's what we're going to focus on now. The first one is user awareness training. Whether it be a platform, you may have heard of a platform that's called KnowBe4. It's probably the most well-known in the world. It's basically a platform where you set your people up on it, and it does phishing tests to your employees. It's looking to see if they have bad habits, and it's looking to give them some instruction. So that would be one thing. The other thing is webinars like this. Having webinars like this, lots of companies do webinars about cybersecurity. It's really good practice to have your people attending webinars at least annually. I know at PCA, we do free webinars monthly. We have a standing monthly user awareness training webinar. We just do it monthly. We encourage our clients to just attend. But very critical, because you see the weakest link. The weakest link is the human being, and that's what the bad guys are focused on. So we have to train our people to get them to develop better habits. The next one is huge, related to business email compromises. It's enable and enforce multi-factor authentication on your email. You can do that. I'm less familiar with the G Suite, but I know you can do it on the G Suite. In Microsoft land, it's absolutely free. You could turn it on. And remember that stat we reviewed a little bit ago? 80% of the victims of business email compromises, they didn't have MFA in place. Sometimes people get scared about MFA, but it's not scary at all. In fact, if you're someone that uses Outlook, once you set it up and build trust between your work machine and Microsoft Exchange, you're not putting that second factor in regularly at all. Only if you're trying to access your email from a browser. And the reason why multi-factor authentication for email is absolutely a gotta have, it's because if you have multi-factor enabled and you make the mistake of giving up your credentials, if somebody has your credentials and they go to a browser to try to log into your account, your Microsoft 365 account from a browser, they will not be able to get access because they don't have that second factor. That's why it's huge. Not 100%, as you can see, 80%. There are other methods of trying to get through multi-factor as well, but it's a pretty, it's definitely a good solution. It will prevent 80%, 80 to 90% of all breaches can be prevented by having multi-factor authentication in place. The other thing is, as I brought up earlier, was turning on that external email notification banner. So simple. It's free. Why wouldn't you? Some people say, oh, I can't deal with it. I like to see that preview or the first few lines of the email. Listen, security comes with a price. The price is that you have to deal with things that are not as convenient. In order to be secure, you have to give up a little bit of convenience to get security. And we talked about the avoiding clicking on links in emails. Absolutely not. Do not click on any links in your email. Don't even open the email. If you don't even know who it's from, be like me. Delete it. Make them spam. I make everybody spam. We're going to continue on it. Attachments. Attachments are really a big problem. A lot of times, attachments can be installing something on your machine. So if there is an attachment in an email, you're not sure if that is a legitimate email, absolutely do not open an attachment. That attachment might start installing a backdoor on your machine that bad guy can then connect to. That's the possibility that I want you to understand. So avoid clicking on and opening up attachments. As I mentioned before, bank account changes, do not handle them solely via email. It's too risky. Think about the case where we talked about 80% of business email compromises didn't have MFA. Well, the 20% that did, they got their email accounts compromised. So a bad guy could compromise one of your emails, one of your people's emails, and send a legitimate email to you and say, please, it looks legitimate, it's from them. And they are unaware of it, because somebody could send an email and then delete it right from sent. Things you have to watch out for. Personal email, another area is personal email on your business machine. Encourage you not to let people access it. Your personal email has a lot of risk, probably just as much or more risk and more spam. Your personal email accounts are probably all over the internet based on all of the different things that you do or places you buy from. Your data is everywhere. And the last thing I have here is, I'm sorry. Keep your web surfing limited to business use. We mentioned that earlier. And also this one, keep your machines patched. You should make sure that you have a protocol in your organization that keeps your PCs, your servers patched for all of the key software updates. Microsoft is obviously one of the most important. If you're using a Microsoft operating system on your machine, absolutely have to keep those things updated and patched. But there's other stuff too. There's other devices that you might have in your within your network. You might have a firewall. You might have switches. All of these things have firmware updates occasionally, and it could be because of security. So it's important that you make sure that you keep these things up to date. Can't stress it enough. All right, we're moving on to polling question number 3. Does your organization have a password policy that is understood by all and enforced? I hope you do. With respect to passwords, we'll talk a little bit more about them as we move forward, but they are a controversial subject, and the future trend is definitely to move away from passwords eventually. That is the future. The future is probably a password is no longer going to be utilized, and there's going to be other things that are utilized. A pass key is one of them. That's I know Google is making that available. Oh, here we go. Look at that. 87% of you do. And 7% not sure. Okay, so that's pretty good. So you do. So that 6% out there does not have a policy. You should have a policy. Trust me on that one. Okay, we're gonna talk about the recommended solutions that you should have in place. So, as with anything cybersecurity related, there are no silver bullets with cybersecurity. Okay, the best position to take is one with many layers of protection. So it's about layering, and the bad guys like easy work. The more layers and the more hurdles that you create, the less attractive you are as an organization that they want to breach, because they're trying to make it easy. So the more you have in place, it reduces your risk, and it also makes it much more challenging for the perpetrators out there to get you. We'll focus first on the must-haves, and then things that I would call advanced, or things that you might consider, not necessarily advanced, but you should consider. And we'll start out with backup and disaster recovery. You need to have a backup and disaster recovery solution. The part that I want to drive home is you need to have it securely stored off-site. Okay? No matter how you're doing it, it needs to be off-site and it needs to be separate. I will share with you a a quick story of something that happened to a client several years ago, and they did not have the solution that we recommended, which was a cloud solution, and they got breached. And you know what happened? It was one of those deals where they would take they would save it on an external drive, and then they would switch it out in the morning and then take it home when they went home. Guess what happened that day? The IT person forgot to unplug it. And so the bad guy got into their network. The first thing they did, they deleted the backups. Delete. And then they encrypted them. And now they were there encrypted with no way to recover. Guess what? They paid the bad guys. And that's what happened. So that offsite part is huge. You must have a fallback. If the worst case scenario happened and everything you got was encrypted or deleted, you need to be able to recover. That's what I'm driving home. Number 2, a firewall. Okay, this is like the bouncer at the bar. The bouncer says, hey, you can come in or you can't come in. That's what the firewall does for your network. It's monitoring traffic that wants to come into your network. If you have a network and there isn't a firewall providing that level of protection, you are increasing your risk dramatically. This is something that this is one of the absolute essential layers of protection that I'm talking about. And this is your perimeter. So this is your perimeter defense. Keeps them out. And you need to keep that, as we talked about, you need to make sure that that device is up to date and it's supported. Number 3, endpoint protection. The more advanced, the better. Antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spam, DNS filtering, whatever, encrypted emails, whatever you think is appropriate for your organization, adopt more, err on the side of more security. That is the advice. And you'd be surprised, but we have come across organizations that don't even have it on their machines in this day and age. No antivirus, nothing. So it is really critical. It's fairly nominal as far as price goes. This is not big money. It's important to protect all of your devices. We already mentioned this. It's user awareness, training, education. Develop your people. The more educated your people are, the lower your risk is. That's the bottom line. Reduce your risk. Password policies. We talked about password policies. We recommend 14 characters. And a 14-character password takes 1 million years to crack right now with existing technology. And that is if it's complex. And when I say complex, I mean it needs to contain an uppercase, a lowercase, a number, a symbol. 1 million years, that's pretty good, right? I think we're safe on that one. Obviously, if you went to 12, it's probably 200 years or something. It's still significant. But technology changes, right? The world of quantum computing is coming. You probably heard quantum computing. What's that going to do to this? Probably change it. It's probably going to make it very easy to crack a complex password. The next thing I'll talk about is, how frequently you should change it. We recommend quarterly. It's a controversial subject. You'll find people that say, don't change your passwords. The act of changing your passwords is not the problem. The problem is that when people get prompted to change passwords, oftentimes they make it weak so they can remember because they're changing it more frequently. So if you still have these requirements in place for complexity and your people are not reusing passwords, it makes total sense to change your passwords frequently. And I did mention, passwords will eventually go away. They'll be with us for a while. You'll see this probably start impacting our lives in the next couple of years, if it hasn't already. Multi-factor authentication, anywhere you can use it. Any place that makes sense. That's the best way to put it. I can tell you at PCA, guess what? Every time I log into my machine, I get a push notification to my phone that says, are you trying to log onto your computer, approve or deny? So I can't even log onto my computer without multi-factor. And believe it or not, it's not that cumbersome. Even though I put my computer into sleep mode or, I lock my screen 4 or 5 times a day, it's a couple seconds, not a big deal. That multi-factor, that extra factor is enormous with protecting yourself and preventing, data breaches. So wherever you have the opportunity, think about it. As I said, the email one is free. There's other sources out there that they're pretty nominally priced. We're not talking about a big expenditure. Number 7 is patching of key hardware, software, as we talked about. Keeping them up, your operating system and your software, keeping it up to date, being patched for any security vulnerabilities that might be out there. This is really important. Believe me, the bad guys out there are looking for any of these type of exploits, and they're looking for people who are laxed at updating things. All right. Last polling question. I've got a few slides left and I'm done. And the polling question 4 is, what is it called when a trustworthy entity asks for your sensitive information, such as Social Security, credit card numbers, login or password? I have a feeling I'm going to have 100% correct on this one.
Okay, we'll give everyone just another second or two to answer. And just a reminder that this session has 5 polling questions, so there will be one more after this.
My bad.
No, that's okay.
One more to go. I know we're running short on time, but we're almost there.
Okay, I'll share those results.
Oh, somebody picked flailing and trolling. Darn. Maybe they missed the fishing slide. The correct answer is fishing. Absolutely fishing. Okay, we're going to move on. These are more advanced. Okay, you might have heard of a SOC. What is a SOC? It's basically a team of people that's monitoring all of your data, coming in and out. They're watching it. They're looking for bad things. We pay for a SOC. We pay a third party to look at everything that comes in and out of our network. We're very paranoid, and we know as an IT company, we're a target. So we want to go that extra mile. To do this yourself, it's very expensive. You could, you'd have to hire a staff of people. And I'm not advocating hiring a staff, but there's companies out there that offer it as a service. Probably the most well-known is a company called Arctic Wolf. You might have heard of them. They're pretty prominent out there in the cybersecurity space, but something to consider, more advanced. Scanning, testing, documentation. This is there are things you should be doing. We would recommend that you do like internal and external vulnerability scans or penetration testing. These are all good things to do. The one thing I would bring up to you though is these are things that you need to commit to doing regularly. Okay. Doing an external vulnerability scan one time or a penetration test one time, it might give you peace of mind, but I want to tell you that peace of mind is brief because it's a point in time. 5 minutes after that, that was run, something could have changed, which would make that, the result of your pen test completely irrelevant now. So you should, if you're going to do these things, have a routine of doing them. I would recommend at least annually for a pen test. We recommend quarterly for external vulnerability scans. The other thing that we talked about, and I had the polling question on policies. Policies and your compliance requirements. It never ceases to amaze me that I run into companies that are subject to compliance, but they're not even really taking it seriously, and it's important. I assist one of our clients with the New York State Department of Financial Services compliance. Guess what happened this year? They got audited. So it's not just an exercise of self regulating. They're going to ask you to prove everything, and thankfully we could, but you need to take it seriously. These policies, they shouldn't be shelf documents. They need to be put in place and followed by all and shared by all. Cyber insurance. When in doubt, have insurance for this. And let me tell you, the insurance carriers, they're used to working with the bad guys. They negotiate with them on the dark web every day. So they're very familiar with this space and what happens with breaches. You should protect yourself, because the thing to consider too is, you might be able to recover, but you also might have damage to you or liability because of data that might have gotten breached and released to the public. You need to think about those things and protecting yourself against liability. Dark web monitoring, this is another good one. What I want to just illustrate quickly is that what you see at the top that's the web. What you see below, that's the dark web. Okay. And that's where all of the criminal activity takes place. And you can see how expansive it is, right? I myself have never been out there. Our CTO is an ethical hacker, and he's out there regularly just to see what's going on out in the space. There are monitoring services out there. What they do is basically looking for any sign of your domain out there in the dark web. And that could mean that you got breached. It could be a leading indicator, because what happens when a lot of times if you get breached is they're going to try to monetize your data. The last thing they're going to do is encrypt your files. So they're going to try to sell your data, and then they're going to encrypt you at the end. So the dark web service is good. It can also highlight instances where maybe a third party got breached, and you happen to have your company email that was on their portal. So it's an interesting service, and they're very cheap, and it's a good way to keep your eye on what's happening out there in the criminal land. And now we are on to polling question 5. And polling question 5 is, was this presentation informative? I will not, I will not feel bad if you don't say yes. I don't have no ego.
And while everyone answers this question, don't forget to drop any questions you might have in the Q&A. If we're not able to get to all of them, Mike would be happy to talk to you privately after the presentation as well. Okay, we'll share those results.
Oh, well, I tried. I got one of you I didn't hit home on, but I got 98 of you, so I'm happy. Is there time for any questions, Christine?
If you can answer it quickly, I do have one question here. We have a few minutes. The question that was asked is, companies are being requested to remit payments online. How secure is this versus sending checks out in the mail?
I would always challenge that vendor that they're utilizing, and I would challenge them on how they protect that information. Like, for instance, and maybe it's something where you might be going on there and setting up your account number for them to pull it out via ACH. That's one way. The other one might be a link for you to put credit card information in. But before I would leverage those type of opportunities, I would want to know, hey, how are you? What kind of information are you storing? Are you actually storing my credit cards or not? Or are you using a big third party, third party payment service? And how are they protecting my data? So it's an area that had we had hours, I would have talked about third party risk. Third party risk is pretty significant. And it's an area that a lot of the insurance companies are really starting to push on, and the compliance organizations are really starting to push on now, which is, hey, it's great that you're doing a lot of good stuff, but what about the third parties? We're all using these cloud providers, right? Our data is all over the place, So I don't think it's a bad thing. Using them is not necessarily a bad thing, but you want to be comfortable with how that information is being protected, because you are correct. I mean, it is safer to just send a check. Any other questions out there, Christine?
We did, let me see. We do not.
All right. If there's any follow-up questions, feel free to send them my way. I am happy to respond to any questions that come up after the fact.
Great. Thank you again so much, Mike. Thank you everyone for participating today, and we hope to see you at our final session after this. Just a reminder that the survey will launch in your browser after this, and we welcome all feedback that you are happy to provide. Thank you again, Mike. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.